So got it? Now you're going to press the PDF down there to get the agenda back up.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Okay.
I guess we should check.
I'm good to go.
Alex is usually on.
Yeah. You're good.
Welcome to the Kingsburg City Council and the Planning Commission workshop. The council chambers are open to the public at 100% capacity. Tonight is Thursday, January 13th, 2022, and I will call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please do roll call?
All right, Planning Commissioner Rook.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Valdez.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Blaney.
Present.
Councilmember Hurtado.
Here.
Councilmember Purcell Jr.
Here.
Councilmember Roman.
Here.
Mayor North.
Here. Item number 2 is public comment. Any person may directly address the council and the planning commission at this time on any item not on the agenda or on any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council and planning commission. A maximum of 5 minutes is allowed for each speaker. Do we have anyone from the public in chambers that would like to make a public comment? Hearing none, we will close public comment and move on to item number 3. Kingsburg Growth Management Ordinance. Presentation by Community Development Director Holly Owen.
You've got full screen there?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to get it going. Just hold on one second. So next to the save thing. This one is how you start
Very good. Thank you. Good evening, City Council members, Planning Commission members, and respective chairs. We're here tonight to talk about the allocation process. It's a process that's rather unique to Kingsburg. It's a historical process in a sense that it's been in our code and derived from the Growth Management Ordinance. And the Growth Management Ordinance, or any growth management plan, is also unique, I believe, to Central Valley cities of this size, and reflects the outcome of a lot of community conversation, a ballot measure, and council direction over many years. This is a section of the statement of purpose of the Growth Management Ordinance. I mean, I usually don't like to read PowerPoint, but I think it's kind of impactful to highlight the focus of this for city residents back in the day. It was the ordinance was to limit the rate of residential growth in the city to a level compatible with the size, financial limits, resource constraints, and services capabilities of the city and service providers within the city, and also to maintain aesthetic goals of the city. So that was their purpose back when they adopted this. I brought some items also for show and tell in the back for those of you who are here. There's a couple of copies of some of the older general plans. You see how modest they were in comparison to what they are expected to be today. And there's also an example of a completed allocation submittal just for your reference if you want to peruse them. It's interesting to read that also the housing goals from previous general plans. You can see the trends and priorities over time. The Kingsburg General Plan Policy 1988 called for an increase in residential units to be limited to an annual 3%. It must have been a reflection of a concern at that point about growth as that 3% came about then, but not necessarily earlier according to the general plan policies. It was followed by a ballot measure that was voted, that gave council the tools to regulate growth. We're only talking about residential growth here too, not commercial, not industrial. This strictly is a residential growth management ordinance. And again, the following year, they had an amendment to clarify the process of awarding allocations. By 2013, allocations had begun piling up from unused years, and council passed an ordinance allowing a 3-year accumulation of unused allocations to be distributed if needed. So what is this allocation? Allocation is a right to apply for a building permit to construct one single-family residence or one multi-family residential unit in the city of Kingsburg. This does not apply to a custom house on a single lot built by one person. It is more for subdivisions or model homes. You can see in your packet we had a spreadsheet of the allocations over time from 2012 to 2021, and you can see the ebb and the flow of those allocation submittals, reflecting some of the economic ups and downs and the level of interest and some of the priorities of the applicants. So the process is outlined in great detail in the ordinance. It follows a very strict calendar cycle. So every calendar year, the allocations are made available, and by September 30th of that year, applications need to be filed with the Planning and Development Department. It's very specific. By 4 p.m., the papers need to be turned in, that kind of thing. And then the month of October is dedicated to rating and ranking those allocations by internal staff. And then by November, there's a first and ideally only Planning Commission meeting to review and recommend to council these allocations. And then they go forward to that first council meeting in December, very specific again, to consider and issue the allocations. So what happens if there's no applications? Now, last year, it just so happens that there weren't any. So if there are no applications by September 30th, then the following February, the first council meeting in February, a second allocation may be opened. It's an action that's taken by council, officially opening that. And then again, the process continues. So by March 31st, there's a deadline for applications to be submitted. By April, there's a rating and ranking. In May, there's a first Planning Commission meeting, and then in June, there's a council, followed by the council meeting that awards the allocation. The ordinance also is pretty specific in terms of the rating and ranking process. There's a point system. It's meant to be a competitive allocation process, and it's referred to as that. And these are the criteria that the internal review uses to rate and rank the applications. If there are many applications, someone will not get allocations. You can see by the point system that there are a few that are a little more heavily weighed, perhaps reflecting the intent of analysis for those particular categories. Location suitability is one. I know if you're outside the urban boundary and way outside of town, you're not going to get any points. If you're an infill project, you may get full points, and then it sort of breaks down from there. Infrastructure and services is clearly an issue. They want to make sure that they award points to projects that have the least impact, and then those points can be allocated depending on what the project is proposing. Now, if there's only one application, it's likely granted unless it's deemed deficient in a significant way. So at this point, we are we've gone through this allocation process pretty regularly. There have been some years where we haven't done it at all, but there's usually some collective memory on how it was done previously to try to run through it again. You have in your packet that spreadsheet, and we created that spreadsheet just to keep track of all the units, where they went, and what rolled to the next year. So this rolling allocation or carryover is it's in the ordinance. but it's a point that needs perhaps some clarification. Do we want to have 3 years of carryover like we do this year, for instance, or do we want to just start clean every year with the allocations that are granted on a calendar basis? Do we want to stay with only 2 times a year? Now there's I guess two fields of thought on that for me, and that's that if it's a competitive process, then ideally they're all ranked at the same time, and sort of the best project will arise out of that. But is that necessarily a useful or a fair thing to do? Should we accept applications throughout the year? Maybe it's time to take a look at that and consider that. One of the other issues that we considered was the possibility of allocation unit inflation. I call it, for the lack of a better word, and that means why not ask for 40 units when maybe you only need 35 at the end of the day, but it's easier to go down in your number than it is you really can't go back and ask for more. You'd have to start the whole allocation process all over. So does that essentially take units off the table for other projects that might be worthy of that? The requirements for the application, we really would need a better definition to benefit both staff and the applicants. Do they need a full-blown tentative tract map for an application? The ordinance doesn't seem to imply that, but yet sometimes in the process, the decision makers want to know, well, how big are the lots, and what do they look like, and what's the circulation look like? So how much upfront work are we requiring, and is that a good thing? If it's only a couple of times a year, does that allow enough time to collaborate with staff for thoughtful design of neighborhoods? Are they just rushing a product and then we don't necessarily get the best product that we could have? And then finally, there's a phrase of final entitlement that triggers some of these timelines for applicants that could lose allocations, and I'll get to that just in a little bit. But the point, I think, of the spreadsheet, too, is projects do change over time. For instance, if you look at the Sohal project, it started off in 2016 wanting 21 units, and then their plans changed, and then they went to multifamily for 2020. So it requires us to keep track of projects that change over time, and who got allocations when, and are they required to start all over, or what is that situation? So the interpretation of timing is kind of an important issue too. What about annexations? Annexations are time consuming, and if you look at the process, once the allocations are granted, then a tentative map can be applied for, but they can't apply for it necessarily before the allocations are granted. So there's a public notice, there's a review, and then that goes through our process, and the annexation entitlement process is also one that is done not only within the city but also with LASCO. So they've got meetings and notices with another agency to undertake, and that really can't commence until a tentative map is approved by the city. So there's finally a final map and improvement documents that are created out of that tentative map approval process and the annexation. That can take at least another 6 to 9 months. So you're talking about quite a bit of investment in time and money for the applicant, and that's considered the required development entitlement. But then there's another requirement of timing that comes out of that process, and that is that the ordinance requires construction of off-site improvements to commence within 365 days after they get their final map. So for, in an ideal world, that maybe works fine, but, they need to get a grading permit, and that has to start, but grading permits can't be issued till a final map is approved. And so you really, you're hoping that all the pieces, as an applicant, you're hoping that all the pieces, fall into place, easily, and that you don't get any holdups. So one of the things we're looking for tonight is just a wider discussion, if we can keep your interest, and perhaps a draft recommendation for changing or reviewing ordinance language. We don't have a lot to go on in terms of other jurisdictions following this process. We're kind of working it out as we go here, and from our own experience, and from the goals that the city has in common. So one of the things we talked about is maybe to cover projects needing annexation. Should we make it longer than 365 days to a longer period with some council review or oversight or milestones that need to be made? I think the intention of that 365-day part of the ordinance was to prevent entitled vacant land from just lingering and hanging out in the city for years and years. Some of that has happened certainly in Kingsburg, and some of that has been because there's been state supported extensions of tract maps. So they were able to keep it vacant for 10 years, even though there was an entitlement on that land. We would like to avoid that, because once approvals have been given, you'd like to see construction occur. So we would also like some timing on the allocation process. Does 2 times a year yield a good product for us? Is a competitive process a good thing for the city? Is it a good thing for staff? Does it concentrate our efforts only on a couple of times a year, and then we can kind of drop back, or should we do this on a rolling basis throughout the year? There's a rolling allocation issue. Now, the ordinance mentions that projects can be phased up to 2 years in advance. So you could apply for allocations and then say, oh yeah, in phase 2 we'll have X many housing units, so I want those units going forward to be granted to me, which takes them off the table. But on the other hand, there's another section of the ordinance that allows a carryover of unused units, implying that there's a backwards look at allocation. So, we've done this rolling allocation rather both ways, I think, at least once that I know of, forward and backward. But that's something that could use some clarification. And we have a fair number of units right now, for instance. Is it a good time to nobody used them in 2 years? Should we start over next year with 115 and just wipe the slate clean? The language and the process to prevent this allocation inflation would be a welcome recommendation too. I don't know what that would look like, but it might be useful to have this as something that we could ideally, keep people honest about what they need, and keep some allocations for other applicants on the table if they really aren't intending to use them. So that, in a nutshell, concludes my presentation. I know that this is a lot to manage. There's been a few of you who are very familiar with the process that are at the table. I think they tend to be in this area, but there's a few over here. And if you have anything to contribute, certainly this is the time to do so. I think Alex may have some additions, and perhaps Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a good summary, Holly, especially since, I know you went through the process a few years ago, but, just coming on board a couple of months ago. And so this is, kind of been brewing, I guess, a little bit at the staff level for a little while, which is, part of the reason, now with Holly here, able to have a little bit more of this conversation. But I think that there's a need, to hear from this group, in terms of what the community, what this group wants and what we think the community wants going forward. But I also think that there's, I think the ultimate outcome, obviously, is when there is development, that it's quality development, that it's done correctly. And so, while the growth management ordinance kind of lays out some of the application, you know, once you go through it and kind of live through it, you can understand maybe where there's some areas that we could, you know, we could benefit from some tweaking. And so for example, you know, as Holly talked about, you know, one of the things that staff is supposed to use for rating and ranking these, and let's just say that there's a year where there's 2 applications. And it's difficult from a developer perspective because really the allocations are the thing that kind of gets you to the starting line. So without an allocation of, you know, without any allocations, let's just take a 20-acre subdivision that's going to put on, they want to, you know, let's just say 60 houses, 60 lots. So they need 60 allocations, but they don't even know if they're going to get those allocations. So how much money and time are we asking them to spend on a project if they're not sure that they're going to be able to move forward? And at the same time, if they don't put that design together, staff doesn't really have all the information they need in order to rank them, right? So you're getting 15 points there for architectural design and aesthetic considerations, right? But if you haven't put together a track map for staff to review, or you're just saying, hey, you know what, we've got this 20 acres, we know we can get this is a certain amount here, give us our allocations, and then we'll go do the work. That makes it difficult for staff to, you know, really judge that. And maybe if there's 2, then you just say, well, you didn't put the work in, and we're going to give it to the other person. That's fine. But if there's only 1, then they're getting the allocations, and we don't really have a great idea. And then you know, you're going to take it to the planning commission, and then ultimately the city council, and say, hey, you need to hand over these 60 allocations. And the first thing that the planning commission probably is going to say is, well, where's the map, right? Like, what's this thing going to look like? And so I think we probably need to specify, you know, both for staff and for the applicant, what, you know, we need to improve that application process and spell out exactly, you know, what that is, what that looks like. You know, the carryover thing is interesting because you're sort of starting to see it come to bear now, right? So I think Mr. Crinklaw and Sandra are in the audience. I think that when they made their first application for the properties that they're building on now was in 2017, 16, right? So you can tell that they got to that point there, and there was obviously annexation that was involved, and there's some other sort of market-related factors because, you know, the 40 acre, you know, the 20 acres that they've completed or essentially completed, and the 20 acres that they're working on right now were not part of their initial ask, right? So market conditions tend to change some of the variables as well, and you know, it just kind of, you know, so you know, everybody kind of looks around now, or, you know, maybe you've heard it, I certainly have heard it, it's like, well, there's all these houses that are being built right now. I thought we had this growth management thing that doesn't allow that sort of thing. And it's like, well, but I assure you that each one of them have gone through the allocation process through this time. It's just that, you know, now the market is at such a point where there's a driving force for more housing, and it doesn't mean that they haven't, you know, done what they're supposed to do, and it doesn't mean the staff and, you know, planning commission and council haven't done what they're supposed to do. It's just you're seeing how those things play out. There's an example, you know, too. We have, skip around too much, but, you know, the final entitlement. So right now the language says you have to, you know, create these, you know, you have to, I can't remember exactly where it's at. You have to put in these improvements, you know, in a certain point after all required development entitlements. So from our perspective, I would say that the final map is probably the final entitlement. But there's a piece of property right now that got allocations in 2005 and still hasn't been built and doesn't have a final map. But they've had a bunch of extensions of their tentative track map because of the state, because of the recession and certain things like that occurring. So you're going to have probably a project that gets built, you know, potentially within the next year to 18 months that hasn't really been reviewed for, you know, 15 or 16 years, at least from an allocation standpoint. We will certainly make sure that they go through their paces with regards to the development standards and all the things of the North Kingsburg specific plan requires. But those are just some examples of, you know, and I think that the ordinance it's a really good ordinance. I mean, it's really hard to predict every possible outcome when you're putting something like this together. And so I think we're just at the point now of maybe tweaking it a little bit, you know, so that we can make sure, because obviously I think, again, that the ultimate outcome for everyone in this room is to make sure that when there is development, it's good development, it's long, you know, lasts, stands the test of time. I think we'd like to say you're not building subdivisions, right? You're building neighborhoods that have the amenities that they need, and so that's really I guess the kickoff for tonight. And I guess my hope for tonight is to have some good dialogue from this group, and then maybe task staff with you know, coming back with some of these improvements. And you know, we can have another workshop in the future so that you can review, you know, what those look like. But we didn't want to be too presumptive and you know, not get your input before we brought some of those ideas. So that's all I have. Bruce, did we miss anything?
You have to realize, when this was put together in 2002, 2003, we had how many applicants? We had 6 developers that wanted to come to town to bring major projects, one of which was in excess of 120 units, housing units, that was going to be located on the southwest corner towards closer to SKF plants. That never happened, but that was for a number of reasons. And so this growth management plan was put in place. And then the economy tanked, and so things changed. And as Dave has mentioned, this last project he's working on now, they got the allocations in 2015? 16. So it takes a long time for a developer to go ahead and go through the process to get things annexed and everything else. So what we were dealing with in 2002, 2003, 2004 does not necessarily apply in today's market. So we really need to go ahead and take a look at, should the numbers be increased? Should some of these timing factors, especially the 1-year requirement, because there's a lot more constraints that are put on developers at this point in time than there were then. I mean, now just the environmental documents and everything else are a lot more stringent. So, and as said, it takes 4 or 5 years work just to go ahead and be able to start moving dirt, let alone build a house. So like I say, we've got a backlog of numbers here, but when you have a developer that comes in, he has to acquire the property, and it really isn't economic to develop 20 acres in a pop. You've got to really have, 40 to 60 acres before you can actually go ahead and with all the infrastructure needs and everything else. And if you have 4 or 5 units to the acre, when you start talking 40 units, you know, you start talking a lot of housing units, because you've got to have a 40-acre plan. In fact, you'll see, if you look in some of the cities in the valley, for instance, Bakersfield, they'll have master planned communities. The developer will come in and have 160 acres. And he'll pop the whole, he'll put a school in, he'll put churches, the whole 9 yards. 160 acres is a good chunk of land, but it's also a huge investment for a developer. So, because we are a smaller town, we haven't had that kind of pressure, and there hasn't been that kind of demand. However, with remote work, with the call center going in, you're going to see a lot more demand for housing in our, and because we have a quality community and we have quality standards, people are looking to move to quality. And with this situation, like I said, there's a number of changes that need to be addressed. I kind of feel like we need to move from 115 allocations total to maybe 140, 150, 160, a larger number there. And then have them, like I say, we could phase them and have them phased in over a couple-year period. But we need to go ahead and be realistic what's going on in the world at this point in time. So staff has made some recommendations. Timing and how it's done. So that's kind of what I feel on this situation, to kind of give you a little historical perspective of why this thing was put in place when it was, and why it was geared to limit. And one of the things that we have done recently is by forming special lighting and landscaping districts, or the new district, the new subdivisions carry their own weight. It was not that at that time in 2000. Those kind of special districts were not enforced, and the city was bleeding money anytime, because we didn't have enough resources from a new development. We didn't get enough money coming in from them. Now that's not the case. So, and we can't, and I hate to say this, but we can't go back to the time it was when, let's keep the barbarians out of Kingsburg. That was the attitude. And, some of us were the barbarians, and we got here, and we found out that, wait a minute, everybody else is outside, now they're their barbarians, and we don't want them. That's, that kind of attitude has got to go away. And, you laugh, but I had people say that, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, you were a barbarian. So anyway, but again, this document had a time and place, and it was good for the time and place. It needs to be modified.
A couple of questions. One of them is maybe for the attorney and or Holly. Can allocations be denied if there's more allocations than the demand? So if we have 115 allocations per year, and in that year we only have two projects looking for 50 allocations, is there an assumption that they're going to get their allocations always, or can the application still be denied even though we have more allocations than is being requested? The second question is, if we're going to change it, do we have the authority to change the allocation, since this whole thing was voted on by the public? Do we have to go to another vote if we decide to change the allocations, or do we have to go back to the public, because the public was the initial ones to approve this? We have to go back and say, oh, by the way, we want to increase the allocations, now we have to go back to the public, or do we just make it up and go home? So there's two questions.
That second question, I have the same question.
Do you want to answer that one, Mike?
Yeah, the change to the charter, and I can look it up, I don't know the exact language, you remember it off the top of my head, but it the addition to the charter provided the authority to the city council to create an ordinance of this type for purposes of controlling growth. But it left the specifics as to what the ordinance talked about and what it said and how it restricted growth to the discretion of the city council. So all I did was provide the authority to create that type of ordinance, but you have the ability to amend and change the ordinance to the extent that the council determines is necessary.
That's right, Mike, I found the EIR for that ballot measure, and that was indeed the case.
Yeah, and Paul, in response to your second question, any applicant has to comply with the terms and conditions of the ordinance, and so if we only have one applicant, but they don't satisfy the requirements in order to be entitled to receive allocations, then their application could be denied.
So as a follow-up, the whole advantage of this is the competitive process. It's the competitive process that makes this attractive, because the ideal situation is to always have more demand than we have allocations, because then we get the pick of the litter. We always get the best projects, because there's more projects in our allocations than we get to pick the best projects, which is in the benefit of the city. The only way I see, I could be wrong, the only way I can see make that happen is you get all of the projects, all of the applications for allocations at the table at the same time, then it becomes competitive. And the most ideal thing is to do it once a year. If you do it once a year, you get a whole year's worth of applications at the table at the same time, then it becomes very competitive, although that might not be practical. Twice a year is a little better, because then you get the people submitting projects have to wait 6 months, and then they all come to the table at the same time. The more competitive you make it, the better it is. If you process projects as they came in, you might get one project a month coming in, giving it allocations. You lose your competitive process. The way I see it, I could be wrong, but so a competitive process, you get everything on the table at the same time, and hopefully keep your fingers crossed that you have enough projects coming in. I mean, if you wait 6 months, every twice a year, you wait 6 months, and you only get 2 projects, well, then that's what it is. You have to move forward with whatever you got. So that, in my mind, maintains a competitive process by doing it twice a year. What are the questions there? Oh, so if we allow the allocations to be saved up, we have 2, 3, or 4 lean years where there's no applications, and then suddenly the floodgates open, and we have a tremendous demand for applications like we have had in the past few years. Is that still controlled growth? If you have a 2 or 3 year period of time where you've saved up you got 500 allocations available because you saved them all up, and suddenly over a period of 2 years you got people wanting those 500 allocations, and then you got 500 or 600 homes coming up to be built within a period of 2 or 3 years. Is that still controlled growth? Because the whole object, I remember going through the discussion, I'm old enough to remember this when it first came up, was giving the schools time to respond to the increased population coming in, and the infrastructure, and the police, and the fire. We didn't want to overburden the city with tremendous growth that stressed the city's ability to provide infrastructure and services for the people. So we wanted it controlled so it could be more orderly and organized. Well, if you save up all your allocations and you make them all available, 500 or 600 allocations within 2 years, is that still controlled growth?
To discuss that point, you also have to realize in the real world, the time lag that a developer has to go ahead and go through, as evidence, if you get the allocations, but it's 4 years before you can actually start construction, just because of all that, that should give you plenty of time to go ahead, and especially with the way our special districts are set up, to go ahead and look forward to funding those kinds of things and planning them out. The other side of the coin is, when you start talking about 500 houses being all built at the same time, if we're looking at a 3% annual growth, it should not matter if it happens to be 3% over 5 years, or in the way of absolute numbers. Just because if we looked at that, then you'd have to only allow 115 housing units per year. And in the real world, you can't just say, okay, we're going to build, oh, stop. Because when you put all the infrastructure in, and all the groundwork, and all the planning and everything else that goes into just developing the plans, it may take, this is why we had to talk about the phasing, it may take 4 or 5 years to phase in all this stuff. That's the only counter thought to that argument.
And I would also add too that here in the valley, developers tend to take a longer time too, because the demand isn't as high as in other cities. So they're able to take that time. They have to make sure and measure out that they're going to meet that demand, and that they're going to be profitable. So I think we have to allow for that timing as well. I do have a question about the allocations that roll over. Is there an expiration date for them? Okay, and how long is that?
Well, you can go into this a little bit. It's
Yeah,
like
so
3 years.
it's a little bit,
Drop off.
a little bit based upon interpretation, I guess. So the way that it says right now is that there's the potential for three years. So, the way that it works right now, so, because it's based upon timing, right? So September 30th of last year was the open period for allocations for 2022, so the year that we're in. We didn't have any applications, and so the council will consider at their first meeting in February opening up the second round of the same allocations. So I guess the way that we would interpret that is you've got 115 allocations for 2022 potentially available. You've got 115 allocations for 2021 that were not used, and then let's just say none of them were used. I don't think they were, but and then there were some multifamily. Right? Yeah, the 115 is 80 single family. I should clarify that it's 80 single family a year and 35 multifamily. So it's really 80 single families per year. So let's just say we're breaking it down into single families. 80 in 2022, 80 in 2021, and 80 in 2020. So there's 240 allocations potentially available in that 3-year rolling window for somebody to come in 2022 and ask for them, would be how I would view it. There's also language in there that says that if you have a large enough, project or projects that there's the ability to, quote, phase it for an additional 2 years. So I think if you took the most flexible approach, you could possibly be looking at a 5-year window, so 3 years and look back and 2 years ahead of allocations that you could be asking for, applicants could be asking for. So they expire if the year falls off, right? So let's just say that nobody, comes forward this year, and then you go into 2023. Now that third year in the look back, 2020, is going to fall off. Or if we've been given allocations, but haven't acted upon them, there's an you could lose them if based upon some of the language in the ordinance. So it just kind of depends upon, where they are at in the process. But that's where it gets a little tricky when you're trying to, work your way through that. And if you've got more than one application, that's a little part of the reason why we want some, it's good input. I want to know, that's what I guess what staff wants to hear is, do we want to continue 3 years? Do we not want the 3 years? Do we want less? Bruce brought up, more allocations, could go the other way. So, it just depends.
So I would say, in response to that, if we were to increase the allocations per year, I would say there's room there then to maybe not extend the expiration date as far out as we do. Or maybe there's like a check-in period, and then maybe they can reapply or do like a quick thing for just an extended period or something. The other thing I was going to say is, by increasing the number of allocations we have as well, we allow for some of these bigger projects to come in. We have land around us, especially if we talk about annexations again as well, where somebody may come in and build those 160 lots, a school, a clubhouse, all those kind of things. And this is the perfect place in the valley to do that. So, in a way, and I look back at last year when we were doing the Soho project, and I remember one of the things we said, and it was only 35 allocations, but we were so worried about giving them 35 allocations because that would leave nothing for anyone else. So it seems like it would be to our benefit to increase them. And I understand the competitiveness. I think that's a really great point, that we do lose that a bit by having more allocations than the demand. But maybe by setting expiration dates, setting parameters, and we can have these allocations granted, like twice a year. I was even thinking quarterly, maybe. And that way it's a better, more phased, that is controlling the growth by phasing it that way. You have a choice between 2 to 3, every few months, that kind of thing. And I think too, by getting more, it also invites people to want to develop more. When they hear, hey, we have more space, they're giving more. We're not going to just take the Main City 40 lots. We want 180, or whatever it is.
So the whole object of the growth ordinance, and I'm old enough to remember when it first came in, was that it flies in the face of real world growth. Real world growth might be 25% a year. You could have cities all around us growing at 25% a year, and what the people said in Kingsburg back then is, we don't care. Kingsburg's going to grow at 115 allocations a year, and we don't care what the other cities are doing. We want controlled growth to reduce chaos and allow the city to respond with proper infrastructure, proper roads, police, fire, etc. So that's what I remember about the whole object of the growth ordinance, is it flies in the face of real world growth. So what I'm hearing now is I'm hearing people trying to sell the concept of us moving towards more allocations, moving towards real world growth. We have to catch up with what the other cities are doing. And the impression I had when this first came out was that people came and said, no, we don't. So it's a philosophy now. Are we going to move towards real world growth and increase our allocations, or are we going to go back to the original concept of the whole growth limitation ordinance, where we don't care what's happening around us, this is what we're going to do. We're going to limit our growth in the face of all the other cities that are growing at 25% a year. So it becomes a philosophy argument now. What's our philosophy going to be?
And I would say that that's everybody's intention, to control that and to make sure we have to get ahead.
Well, first of all, also realize the reason we have 115 is because the state issues what they project every county, and they break it down to city, how many housing units we're supposed to develop. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's going to be a whole lot more than 115 this next go-round. But that was the number, if I remember correctly, and I may be wrong, but that 115 was not pulled out of the thin air. That was the number of housing units that was our quote-unquote state allotment, or state, I'll say mandated, but that was what they were projecting us to go ahead and make available. The other side of the coin is, at that point in time, in 2004, we did not have the North Kingsburg, we didn't have any kind of development standards that talked about quality. We now have standards that talk about quality. We talk about rear-facing garages. We talk about a lot of things about, that weren't in place when we were looked at in 2002, 2003, 2004. So Paul was right. We didn't, at that point in time, the city of Kingsburg, the citizens did not want to go ahead and allow any willy-nilly cracker box type housing developments. But we didn't have the tools in place to go ahead and actually have those, like I say, the North Kingsburg specific plan. We didn't have any guidance that we could show developers. And so we had no legal way to prohibit
The undesirable growth, like.
yes,
Yeah.
that would not meet quote unquote Kingsburg's image. And that's why you've got Summerlin, Summerlin, they wanted to be in Kingsburg, even though they're a Tulare County, predominantly a Tulare County development, they wanted to be in Kingsburg because the Kingsburg has a good tag to it.
And also because they can sell the units, because it's a very popular place to live.
Yeah.
Just to bring this back in full circle, Bruce, are you saying that are the number of allocations too few and you see that as a barrier?
No,
Because looking at these numbers, I don't see where that's really the case.
Because we have carryover.
that's because you have carryover.
Exactly. But, and thankfully we have that carryover, so we have that allocation that we can use, versus if you have carryover and you've increased the number of units, is there a cap on the number of allocations any one developer can have?
In this situation, as we have now, there is.
Okay, what is that cap?
If I remember correctly, it's 35. Is that what it is?
That's what we did for Soul Health, that was why we did it.
Well,
That
that's
That
what-
wasn't multifamily, that wasn't
But
on single family.
on a single family,
No, there's not really a individual.
it's 25. 25, yeah.
I mean, they could take them all, they could take all, one could.
So one developer can only get, if we had, yeah, like you say, that's why the phasing comes in. So if you have a developer, and this is,
And that's from the North Kingsburg.
Yeah, there's language in the ordinance that says 25 if you have multiple applications. But there's also language in the ordinance that says that if you don't have multiple applications, then a developer can get more, which occurred in some of these other, a developer comes
Because I'm
in,
looking at,
has 100 and
Dave had 60
yeah,
in 2016 for phase one,
Right.
and 121 for the next two phases.
correct.
I guess we jumped from phase one to phase three and four without phase two.
Well, you're looking at,
Gotcha, okay.
so the difference is, the difference in that is though, is that, at the time you had, there's 80 acres that if you're just talking about the Crinclaw, now all 80 acres are Crinclaw, but at the time, there were two different applicants. He had 40 acres and there was another applicant with 40 acres, and so we did end up issuing them to both, and then, ultimately, Mr. Crinclaw acquired that property, and so that's why.
In looking at this, a couple things stick out, and hearing some of the conversation, like we can kind of control and phase the allocation, but we can't control and phase the actual buildings and when they're gonna be done. And that's the part that I know I heard like schools, police, fire, like that being mentioned, but looking at some of the last few that jump out, Lennar, Crinclaw and Summerlin, and just looking at them, it looks like from allocation time to possible, like when the first homeowners move in, it's like a 4 to 5 year process on all three of those, which I know I can speak on the school part of it. Like, I know that our district office is in communication with the city and looking at what is planned, and they are predicting and planning and asking all those questions. So when you look at like the 4 to 5 years, That's a good amount of time to plan, but they're not all like that. We have some that were, I think we said allocated in 2005, and they're still not built. But we also don't have, all of those steps that these others have already been going through, where we would have the track map and those sorts of things, and knowing that it's gonna progress. So, our schools can handle more kids, and they actually need more kids. And I know that with T-Mobile coming in, we're probably not only going to need a lot of single-family homes, we're gonna need those other units also, and that, I feel like it's gonna come up more and more. Where I know it's not a popular conversation, but that 35 a year might not be enough. And, those entry-level, homes, single-family homes, I think that's why we do see Summerlin selling so quickly, because it's a different price range. But also the multifamily units, I feel like we're gonna see more of a need, because if you look at the cost of housing in Kingsburg, our young families are not able to afford, the type of housing that's going in currently that's brand new. And as far as our schools, we need more students, we can handle more students, but we probably won't see it unless we look at those types of housing units, also being considered, so.
And that's what I was gonna add as well. I think that's a really great point, bringing those two things together. And I've had many conversations with you about this, because I'm one of those, right, young families who wants to be able to live here and can't afford it. And so my question that I've had, just been kind of waiting, all the dialogue's been going on, but my question was, we know we can change the number of units that are allocated per year, but can we change the percentage with the single-family housing to multifamily housing? So right now, 70% are reserved for single-family dwellings and 30% are for multifamily. Can that be changed to 60-40? Can that be changed to 50-50? I mean, I'm not saying anything permanently out there, but I'm just saying, can that be changed? Because if we went to 160 allocations per year, 60%, 40% single-family, multifamily, we would see 96 single-family, 64 multi-family each year. And then, of course, those can be sold over or whatever like that. But I feel like, you know, we want to move towards growth and inclusion of multifamily affordable housing. And we know a lot of people want to live here. And our affordable housing in this town is still up to par, I believe so. Because we live in Kingsburg, we've got quality services, you said, quality community, people want to live here. So even with the multifamily units going up, I believe we'll still maintain a beautiful quality of life where people aren't, you know, terrible. So, can that be changed, the percentage as well, or just the numbers?
I think there's discussion going on by those who would be able to best answer that question, but I will say that the housing element is looming. And the discussions are going on now with, it's a multi-jurisdictional housing element, and we are rounding the corner to receiving what we call our RENA number. There is no doubt in my mind that we will be having to look at rezoning for multifamily, more. To make that number. That doesn't mean that it ever gets built, frankly. I mean, that's all about money, and it's about, interest, and profit in doing so. But I think that we will definitely see, the need to rezone to higher density, with this next housing element, and that would meet some of what you're speaking of in terms of the allocation process.
We've also seen that we have a very competent planning commission, that when you look at the last project that came to you and how hard you worked with it, with the multifamily housing unit, like, it's a good, beautiful, quality project. You know, if it gets built, and we get to see it, you worked hard to make it Kingsburg.
Thank you very much. We did work hard, you're right.
Many hours, maybe, at work, but.
Yeah, Councilmember Furtado, just, I think you were asking a question about the ability to change the split. I mean, all of those things, from a legal standpoint, you guys have the ability to amend the ordinance to, you know, higher allocations, lower allocations, different splits. I mean, that, to Commissioner Cooper's, point, that's a little bit more of a philosophical, discussion for this group, and, it's a good discussion, the intent, from staff's perspective, there are just some things that we wanted to make sure that we were clarifying, so that we can process applications well, but it's a good time too, if there's a desire to have a conversation about more wholesale changes with regards to, the allocation, the allocations themselves. One thing that happens too, that extends the timeline a lot is, and maybe it's something that's what Mike and I were talking about, is something that we could look at from an application standpoint, is sometimes you have developers that come with an application, and they're generally going to be probably a little bit more seasoned, have a little bit better understanding of what's happening with the process, and then, if and when they get their approvals, that's probably going to move a little bit quicker. And in other cases, you have property owners, landowners that might go through the process to just get those entitlements and then in turn sell them. Mm-hmm. And so what happens with those folks is, they're going through the entitlement process, but they might sit on it for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years until they can find a deal, or they strike a deal with a developer that then will build it. And so that sometimes, they've got those allocations, and that's one of the reasons why we probably need a firm, what's a final entitlement, and maybe we write something in that says that if you don't use them, regardless of that entitlement by a certain time frame, they're gonna, they will expire. But again, that's a conversation, I guess, based upon what the preferences of this group, and making that, maybe tightening up that application a little bit more, because those factors too impact, when that development will occur. So that's something else to consider.
So I just want to respond to Madam Mayor's comment about the multifamily housing. Absolutely, we need more quality multifamily housing. Absolutely. How are you going to get it? Well, after being here so many years on the Planning Commission, City Council, if you leave it up to the developers, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. If you leave it up to the developers for them to voluntarily put in multifamily with their 100 unit single family development, you're not going to get it. Even when you give them allocation enticements with multifamily, you're still not going to get it. There's just a resistance to them building multifamily. It's got to be financial. They're not busting down the doors looking for multifamily housing in this town. So I hate to say it, but if you want multifamily, it's in your hands, City Council. It's up to you. You have the power to demand multifamily, and one way you can do it is a North-specific plan. There might be other ways to do it, where instead of making it voluntary to have multifamily, you say if you want to get your project approved in a North-specific plan, you have to build 30%. It's not optional. You have to build 30% multifamily, then you're going to get it. But if you don't make it mandatory, I'll tell you, you're not getting it. You're not getting it.
And then the counterpoint to that is, when you start making it mandatory, the developers can say, thank you, but no thank you.
Okay, this is Kingsburg, remember? We have a growth ordinance. Who else has a growth ordinance around here?
So,
Kingsburg.
You also have the community.
Yeah.
Something to rewind a little bit. We were here 10 years ago, way back. Our first pitch on our open piece. We had a beautiful multi-generational, beautiful piece, multifamily, multi-generational homes, a whole array. They came to us with pitchforks.
They filled this room.
So I'm just saying.
Again. Not out in that area.
We have different gamuts and different situations. Lots of balls, so we're just trying to catch the right one. So we're open. It's just,
one of the things I'll say too with respect is that not all developers do multifamily housing. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a developer who comes in and then you mandate that they do 30% multifamily, you're going to get the housing, but we also want it to be quality and to last a long time. And if they're not in the field of doing that, then that's probably not what you're going to get long term, right? You're going to get the housing or the multifamily. You're going to get that it's being built, but you may not get the other side of that.
We don't want junk. We want quality, for sure.
And 35 probably a pretty good number. If you look at any large projects, they tend to go the other way pretty quick. So you could build a 35-unit, very nice project with one application, get your allocations, have another project next door, another application, get your allocations, but you're not creating this huge, 150 complex. That's not gonna be good, no matter how nice it is. But if you keep it on the small side, you can control the standards that way, and be able to have affordable housing.
Right, and multifamily housing also includes duplexes and triplexes, and those are very desirable to have, and those are perfect units for this type of community that we have.
Yeah, you're both correct. Mr. Crinkle's correct. Nobody wants these big multifamily projects with 3 or 4 units. Nobody wants that, forget it. You're also correct. They can put in duplexes and triplexes, so if Mr. Crinkle came forward with a project and he wants 150 homes, if he can build a home, he can build a duplex, he can build a triplex. It's the same board.
We have.
It's the same tile. I mean, there's no quality problem with building a triplex. Mr. Crinkle, can you build a triplex as good as you
We
can
did
build a
it on the
duplex?
west side.
Right over
Okay,
here.
Right over
so
there.
it can be
Done.
done. All we need is the city council to make it done.
I will mention too, one thing about the North King Street specific plan is this, requirement for 10,000 square foot lots. There's a lot of, developers that have, some heartburn about that in today's markets. I mean, there's certainly a small demand for lots of that size, but you're already not talking about affordable housing when you get to a lot, to that size. And perhaps that's something that we can look at in terms of an amendment to the specific plan, if we wanna open up that. That's a whole other effort, but perhaps that would be ideal locations for duplexes instead of just the single family, units.
I think that's, I don't think I'd like to budge on smaller, I don't want smaller lot sizes, but they're too small. I don't want to be seeing my next door neighbor's bedroom, but, I will say if we can put something in the Kingsbury plan where this zone, this multifamily units can be on these smaller lots, that does make sense to do that, to lower that so that it is more desirable. I also wanted to mention, first of all, thank you, Mayor North, for the shout out for all of us, and I want to point out too that Stovall ended up being a person who went back and forth with us. So I think it's also important to recognize when these developers or landowners are coming in and are willing to work with us, even if it may not be as desirable at first, they're showing, the good faith that they want to work with us and do those things. So I think that's something also that it's more subjective, but I think that's important to think about as we're considering and making decisions, that there are ways to decipher in between people, you still have control, you don't have to say yes.
Just, to bring us back to the staff recommendations, Holly and Alex, are these the 4 specific things that you want direction on for tonight?
I think it's a good jumping. I think there's lots of things that we can unpack. We've done a fair of it tonight, but I think that we should probably start, trying to divide some of the things up, to get some direction on how best to. I think I heard. I know Commissioner Cooper at least said to keep it at, the certain times of the year. So just some direction there.
So maybe we can go one by one and
sure.
just kind of discuss each of those 4 points.
Yeah, so the first one is talking about projects that need annexation, and I think what we might have to, I think this kind of ties into what is the final entitlement. So what do we view as the final entitlement that really starts that running clock? So a little more into the weeds in terms of, what it takes for a developer to get to this point, but I'm assuming that the final entitlement would probably be the final map. And maybe there's a time frame that we give them to get to final map stage. So, you really have the ability to kind of let it, a tentative map. You can ask for extensions, but if you're never coming to the table and asking for a final map, then you're never really starting that timeline on, starting to build those units. So maybe that's the first one.
You know, and that's a very good point, and that's what happens. Either they map the property, the tentative map, or how the developer map it, and that creates the value, right, and then it sits. So some kind of time frame. I know you guys probably wonder what the heck is this Dave here? Some kind of time frame, one extension on the tentative map, then go to final map. Once you go to final map, it's tough to get it annexed, you know that. So your 2 years is probably a better deal there, get it annexed. If you don't do all that, then you lose your allocations. So somebody else that maybe really is gonna build can get back in there and build, and you'll find it'll level your growth. You won't get these huge spikes that way, just my opinion. And also looking at them twice a year, being competitive, that's the whole idea of the whole thing. If you took them every month, how would you know who's better? So I think that's wonderful. Oh, that's a great point. It's really a good system, believe it or not, guys. We've developed in a lot of other cities, and we were here back when it was all being presented, and it's done exactly what it was supposed to do. Of course, the market is going to change it more than anything, but it will, it's going to cap what's going on. You look at it in 18, you had, looks like 2 applications, Holly. In 19, 1. I don't know what you have coming down the line. I don't know if you're getting inundated or not.
Oh, well, it's busy.
I'm sure you get people knocking on the door. And I can tell you too, just from being out in the world, the developers, when they hear there's allocations in Kingsford, they head the other way. A lot of them do. I mean, fine with me. We understand and know how it works. So right there, you kind of control some growth. But is on 2021, is that ours? Is that the Jackson piece? Because I see you have 1 there.
No, I got nothing in 2021. Not in my.
We had it in 2020.
2020.
Ours was 2020.
Yeah.
A 35?
The Jackson piece.
That's our
It was 2020. We submitted in September.
of 2020.
Yeah.
So for number 1, what I'm kind of.
Sorry about that.
I'm kind of hearing from everyone that possibly the timeline starting from the final map, but have a timeline put in place to get you the final map. And so on number 1, then what we would need to do is give staff direction to draft that. Is that what we're thinking? Yes? Bruce?
I think, yeah, like I said, the object is to prevent people from going ahead and getting a tentative map and sitting on it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's work on that.
Okay. So you like, and to start when there's a final map, but there to be a timeline in getting that final map.
Right.
Okay. So then item number 2, kind of hearing people, it sounds like the twice a year is good. Yes?
Yeah, and that's fine. I think we just need to specify language. Like right now, it's a little open-ended in the actual ordinance.
Right, as Alex said, it's kind of open-ended, but I think the goal of the ordinance was in September is when your competition starts. And if they didn't get any applications in September, then you'd fall to your March deadline. You may not need to do your March deadline. It's always September, so that's the goal. I think you already have it, it's just fine-tuning that conversation or that note.
And I think, the way that it reads right now, our interpretation is that the council has the option to open that up in the second time. So if the council says, we didn't get any applications and we're okay where we're at, we're not going to open it up for the second time. So you have that discretion.
So staff direction, just on clarifying that.
Yep.
So then on to item number 3.
Right. So right now you have a 3-year rolling, that council can, basically they consider it when the applications come in, and there's a 2-year phasing. So the question is whether you want to, you know, continue that process of the carryovers.
So that would allow the larger projects, if they wanted to come in,
Correct.
to be able to do that. Any discussion on this, or so we can give staff direction?
The only point I was gonna say is, if a builder is only allowed 25 allocations per year, you can't build a subdivision and have any plan. That's why you need to be able to have at least 2 years and possibly 3 years, because at 25, that's only 50 houses. And I mean, that sounds like a lot of houses, but for a developer, I mean,
That's 5 acres.
yeah. How many, Dave, your experience in this, what is your minimum development project? 25 acres or?
20's pretty common. 20 gets you around 60 lots, 62 lots, larger lots. In this market, it's a year, it's gonna be sold out. And then built out, you got built too. So 25 would be, that would be rough, because now you've turned it into a 3-year project.
Yeah.
By the time you get halfway through that, something's gonna dip and that would be very difficult.
So you think so we need to go ahead and have this rolling allocation.
The rolling works, and you're still gonna have the same amount, right? Whether you build, 80 in 3 years, or you wait 3 years and build 240, it's still the same numbers are all the same.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of things that go into building a project, and that in itself, slows it down. It takes time. And, so anyways, I don't wanna get off on all that, but the rollover, I think, works well. I think they should expire. I know a lot of people go, is this Dave again? But after 3 years, they should, because you shouldn't have 500 or 600. That wouldn't be good.
Mm-hmm.
But that 240 is a number that, that I think people could live with.
And right now, we do have that with the 3 years.
Mm-hmm. And personally, I wouldn't increase the allocations. I really wouldn't. If you're gonna do that, just take the whole system away and.
I think we're as Holly's mentioned, I think we're gonna be looked at very,
Well, that's.
the state is gonna go ahead
Yeah,
and
you
give
got
us.
the state side of it,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
And so we can't go ahead, I hate to say this, but we don't wanna raise any red flags with the state.
Yeah, that's true.
You do have to.
But then you're also considering the infrastructure that, within the community itself, that would have to be adjusted if you increase the allocations, making that assumption.
But the infrastructure is pretty much borne by the developers. And special districts, the way we've created.
So you're talking about over a 3, you created another 90 units, roughly another 30, if you went to 150? Is there enough income from the developer for 90 units over 3 years to handle that in the schools and the police and things like that? I mean, it's a consideration, it's something that needs to be.
Well, go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, but with our special districts, that's one of the factors that goes into what the special district is gonna be paying for on these new subdivisions.
Talking about the community facilities districts, yeah, they're paying for, police, fire, and, some of the other things that weren't normally covered under a landscape and lighting district.
Like the North Kingsburg specific plan saves and protects us a lot with the growth. And so I feel like most of us feel very confident in that plan. And so if we can put any language into this that kind of maybe either, brings that into it too, refer to this, or somehow to make sure that we are always connecting the dots, and that those developers and landowners realize they also need to be looking at this too. And, not going back and forth, like they know from the get-go, this is accept this quality over quantity, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that now, because I've just been working on that with some interested developers, and they've been asking, refer to the North Kingsburg, say, look at the North Kingsburg specific plan, but people don't read these days, or they just want a list, or whatever, so we're working on some informal guidelines.
Yeah, like a cheat sheet kind of thing,
Yeah.
that they can refer to as they're doing this, you know.
It's Kingsburg centric.
So kind of what I'm hearing on number 3 is, right now, keeping it as it is, as far as staff direction, but this is also something that we could have another workshop or look at if, like, when T-Mobile goes in and there's a need for more things, or the state tells us we need to do something different, and then we can look at allocations at a different time if we need to change that.
I think if the state comes in and makes changes, we're gonna have to open this up to the public so that it's gonna be very clear, because one of the points you brought up was there's certain projects that bring pitchforks, and we were put up here to represent those people that have those pitchforks. So I need to hear from them when those come up. So I almost don't wanna have the conversation about anything with the state until it happens, and then we're gonna kinda have to start over. That would be my concern with that.
And it's good that it's coming up now, because if something like that does happen, we're already 10 steps ahead, like, we already started talking about this. What is it gonna look like if we have to up those allocations? Do we wanna have it 70/30? Do we wanna have it at a different percentage for the single to multifamily? And so I think getting the public involved now, you guys are more than welcome to come, public, to these workshops now and keep these rolling, keep these going, so that it's not a shock or a mandate, it's more of us getting ahead of it, because we want local control. We want to be ahead of this growth management and making sure we keep things Kingsburg and quality, but still understanding that there may or may not have that, you know, mandate happen, and we just want to be ahead of it. So I think it's really good that we had this workshop, because I know these were the specific things we're talking about, but these other things will come to light, and it's good that we have staff thinking about it, having a real training, and hopefully we won't be met with pitchforks, but with, just concern for how we want to see our city grow at a reasonable rate.
It sounds like what you guys are saying is to keep the 3-year. I think what we would do is, we'll just, from the staff's perspective, if there comes a time where we're recommending something to the planning commission and the council that involves using, older allocations are part of that rolling amount, then maybe we're just very clear, on that as part of our, recommendation, so that everyone, when you guys are voting on it, you're aware that you're gonna be potentially utilizing allocations from a, from that rolling, portion of units.
Alex, with that being said, would we be able to put different, guidelines or requirements for the rollover?
In terms of,
Like, say the developer comes in, they're gonna probably be part of the carryover amount allocation. And you're gonna notify us that it's the carryover that we're gonna be voting on. Will we be able to put separate guidelines on those allocations carried over? Like, if they're gonna get extra, we make sure we do such and such, this and that, to ensure that it doesn't, get out of control. Like, is there something we can do with those rollover allocations?
You can't,
Like, in the
guidelines, or does
so when we're
You
deciding
can't-
on whether or not to allocate, like, are we able to take just the ones that haven't carried over? Those are more than what we have allowed them to have, so are there extra guidelines we can put on that? I don't know if I can say that.
And wait,
Do you have an
ordinance reads,
example?
no, I don't,
Yeah.
no,
Kind
I
of
don't
like
think
a
so,
teaching,
Michael,
do you have an
so.
example?
I don't know if I can really give an example. Okay, so say someone comes in, they get the 25 units or whatever, okay? They wanna get an extra 20 units that were carried over, okay? Or allocations, I'm sorry. So you're gonna tell us 25 is the normal, and then an extra 20 is because of the carryover. Do we need to think about that in a different way when we're approving that? Do we need to put extra guidelines or things on that when we're deciding to give these developers more allocations than what we would normally assign?
No, the allocations are with regards to a specific project, and so yeah, we can't condition, you know, the rollover allocations are just, they're allocations that are now available for the planning commission and the council to issue because we didn't have development in prior years.
Right.
And so we, you know, it's not, so there are allocations that are made available
Okay.
through the ordinance. And we can't, because they're on a single project, we can't condition them differently than the other allocations for that same project. You would have to condition the entire project.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I think that answers my question. I just wanted to make sure, because what you're saying is we're gonna have to take a second thought about the fact that we're going to be allocating carryover allocations, you know, so what is the second thought that we're putting behind? Is it, okay, you know, have we already gone through the process, those are extra, we can use them without a second thought? Why would you need to notify us, you know?
Well, I think what staff's talking about is just letting you know that this project that wants more than the 1 year's availability, staff recommending that they get it, and here's where it's coming from.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, they're not, because it's a discretionary approval by you guys and
Right.
by the council to allow that 3-year rolling. So if, you know, we may recommend it and you may say, no, we have enough building going on
Right.
because of these other things occurring, because of the timing of the last, you know, several projects, and we don't want to issue more than the annual allotment.
Okay, so we don't necessarily always have to give them, you know, just because they're.
Right.
I think for me, the only thing I just want to make sure that we remember is, you know, this was passed by the voters, we want to make sure that we keep an eye on the number that we are rolling over each year, and because there was a, you know, there is that 3% set amount, because that's what the voters passed, so they were concerned by that. And so I do want to just, for me, that's the thing that just concerns me, that we're looking at numbers and how many, you know, if this is 115 that we're rolling over each year, and how many we're going to allocate per year. I just want to make sure that number's kind of in line with that, just because that's what the voters wanted. And I know it's up to our discretion whether or not that we, going back to council, we want to change that. I just want to make sure that that was what everybody did vote on at some point. So I think that's the thing that kind of keeps going back to my head is as we're throwing numbers out, is that that's what the majority of this town did want at one time, so.
But you also have to remember, it was 3% of a much smaller number. Much smaller number
Much smaller number than what?
of houses. We said 3%, you talk about, it was never written into the, it was always discussed, it was a selling point, for lack of a better term, a generally understood selling point. It was gonna be a 3% growth rate.
Right.
It was never written into the ballot measure, in the proposition. It was never fixed at 3%. And the other thing was, it was 3% of the number of houses we had in town 20 years ago. We have a lot more houses in town now.
True.
So if we go to 3%, if you want to take it 3%, then we would have had to go ahead and increase this 115 every year by whatever. So that's, so that getting back to where the 115 came from, if I remember correctly, it was because of what the state was telling us are suggested, or how's it phrased, Holly?
Yeah, the housing element,
The arena number.
Yeah.
But I'm not, you know, that's interesting, Bruce, I'm not exactly sure if that's, where the origin of the 115 is. I'm sure that it can be dug up.
And I can't remember, to be honest with you, exactly.
Yeah, and I think you're right, the 3% was not part of the initial, the ballot, as all ballot language was pretty simple. It just authorized council to create a mechanism for growth management.
But that was kind of the selling point.
Yeah.
And I think that, to speak to Councilmember Roman's point about just remembering where this all came from foundationally, it is to control the growth. So that's the biggest thing that impacts me. You know, when I talk to constituents and stuff, that's their thing, is they don't mind growth, correctly managed. And that's where you guys really are the experts that come into play with that. So I think that as we talk about, if we're gonna increase anything, we have to go back to foundationally why this was voted in and what that selling point was to those people and stick to what, they were sold a product and they voted for it. So as long as we're still within that, I mean, compound interest with this can get super scary super fast. And so I think that's my concern with that.
Okay, item number 4, you have staff direction enough on
Yes.
3?
Yeah, so number 4 doesn't happen a ton, but again, more of a language cleanup. So for example, if you come in, you have a 20-acre parcel, maybe you do the work, you get it to a tentative map, but the way that it reads right now is that you're asking for an allocation amount. Let's just say you say, well, I want to give me 70 allocations. Because then you can work backwards from that, so then maybe staff comes and says, that's too many for this, you gotta have alleys, you have to have a park amenity or something like that, you gotta have something else in here, you gotta lower it down. Well, they can always staff is allowed to lower those allocations to 60, so someone, if you're savvy enough, you're gonna ask for more, knowing that you could come back off that, but let's just say you ask for 56 and something happens and you're like, I wanna go to 57. The way that it reads is you have to go all the way through the process again. There's no leeway to go up with that. And so I just think maybe there's something we can talk about. Like maybe you don't have to go through the process again, but maybe it has to come back through the planning commission, to get that approval. And there has to be a reason for that request. You know what I mean? They'll have to understand the reason for that request. But the way that it works right now is that that's not an issue, or it's not a possibility. You're starting all over, and so I think if there are really competitive, what we're hoping for is competitive, applications, then this is something that we should look at too.
Are you talking about building tolerance into it?
Yes, or just not making you go back to square one. If you ask for 58 and it turns out you can do 59 or something like that, you might have to come back and ask for.
It might encourage honesty at the beginning of the process, I guess.
But somebody right now could come in and say, well, I want 65, and if they don't really have 65, and, because there's a limited number, that impacts how we view those individual applications.
What you're asking is for us to have you guys draft that staff can make that discretion, so it doesn't have to come back to planning and council?
Potentially, or we're happy to, bring it back to the planning commission or something so that they can sign off on it, ultimately, but that they're not necessarily having to wait until the next September 30th or something like that to ask for one more allocation or something like that, right? There just needs to be some leeway in that language. Right now that doesn't exist.
And I think it's good to protect staff by saying that you've got to at least be approved by one body or the other. Because that's not fair to make staff. That puts them in an ugly position.
And then, it's not on this one, but I know we talked about it earlier, one more thing is, where'd you have it?
Final entitlement.
No, final entitlement we talked about. I went too far. It's basically what do we want from the I think we need to tell the applicant exactly what we want in the application, which maybe that is a tentative track map. Like we need to get them to a certain bar before they're even applying for the allocations and write that in so that it's not, well, we have this land, we have a vision, we think it'll be 60, and then and they're the only application maybe, and then they're coming to the planning commission, and the planning commission says, well, I don't even know what this project is going to look like. But from a technical standpoint right now, we would have to at least, bring you that application, so.
Before we move on to that, can I ask you on number 4?
Sure.
Are we gonna just give staff direction to draft something and bring it back on, I don't think we finished that up,
I'm sorry, yeah.
on the allocation inflation? Planning commission, are you okay with that? You guys okay with that on number 4? Having staff draft something and bring it back? Okay. Sorry about that, Alex.
No problem.
And now, before you leave that, you're talking about putting in some kind of key to, if you go up or down, without having to go through the full process again. It's fine.
Up or down, correct?
I think so. I think that makes sense. I think if the project is going to change,
Yeah.
and something that you guys have already approved, it probably makes sense that you're
You wanna
coming
know why
back, so you're
it's
not,
changing.
you know, staff doesn't say, oh, well, they changed it, so.
That would include going down. So, I mean, if you add a park or whatever, now you have less allocations.
Hopefully the park's there in the first place.
Oh, where I was going with it, because I read the inflation part as I could have whatever and decide, well, I'm giving you 60 units. And then later on, I can go to 50 or 40 or whatever, just because I want to, without having to go through any other kind of, anybody else having any input on it. That way, the allocations are not being held by somebody who may not be using them.
But you're still having to
Go back
go
to-
through all the parties with the 60, let's say 60 allocations. You still have to do your tentative map, you still have to do your final map, and it has to somewhat conform, which you already have in your ordinance, that it's got to conform to that conceptual.
Once you get to that point, but if we're still looking at the tentative, right now, you come in with a tentative map and get that allocation and hold them for as long as you can hold them. If you were going to be making a change by reducing it, then it would give us at least an opportunity that someone wouldn't be doing that, or wouldn't be inclined to do that.
But the whole point is growth. So you would definitely come back if you're going to want to exceed the number you were allocated. If you're not going to take on one of those, unused would go back into the pot.
I think as a standard, the point is the sort of sandbagging the number to get to take extra units,
Oh,
because you're trying to
Time
buy that
up.
flexibility.
Time up.
But you're taking them off the table for potentially for somebody else to use. That's, I think, your point.
Which could potentially be 3 to 5 years.
Well, or just, you know, there'd be another project that wanted those 5 units, and then they were reserved, but then sort of dropped or put back in the pool, you know what I mean? It was put back in the pool, or even they just disappeared because you asked for them in the first place, hedging your bets, and then didn't use them.
But by requiring a tentative map to be processed, doesn't that pretty much lock in how many housing units you're gonna have?
Yep.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be an approved tentative track map, right? You just need to do the work, because ultimately the council's going to approve that, but you have to do the work to get it to a certain point anyways, which, it's a little chicken and egg, I guess, but if you're serious about, I mean, you guys are serious in the room, but if you're really serious about getting the allocations and building, you're gonna have to go through that process anyways, but, you know, it just becomes a matter of when are you going to do it, and when does the planning commission get to see that, is it, you know, during the application?
So I misunderstood. I thought you were recommending to go ahead and get a tentative map approval and then get that.
You don't need to go to the planning commission, that would require a whole different process. And I don't think you've done that in the past. I think
No, we haven't.
You've brought tentative maps that are
It
roughed
almost-
out and pretty, you know.
It almost makes more sense though.
Yeah.
It almost does, but it's sort of, yeah, you're right.
Because then it's
Are you
kind of
volunteering?
locked in, everybody sees it, everybody's approved it.
Yeah.
Then you get the allocation,
But you have
and they're really not gonna change.
There's still some leeway with the tentative track map though, too, generally in conformance with that, right? You can still move some lines and just some stuff here.
Yeah, and you could, and maybe what you could do is also.
Is this something maybe planning commission?
Well, no, I mean,
No, we're just working on the fly.
I guess the
here.
question is, I mean, do we have direction to come back with something that's more definitive on what the applicant needs to provide as part of the application?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Way to bring it back in.
All right. That's all we have for tonight.
I'm not gonna ask any more questions.
Yeah.
We will adjourn this workshop.
Thank you for having us.
With their tentative map, and then ask for a revision allocation if we have a need to do it anyway.